Thanks to the good people at the Regulator Bookstore for hosting this event. This is our first Veterans for Peace Memorial Day remembrance of the victims of war in prose and poetry and song. We have 4 readers now spanning a number of generations from World War II to the recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'd like to begin with an introduction of Joseph Eager of Durham. Joe is 91 years old, served as a sergeant in the U.S. Air Forces in World War II. He will read from Einstein's Violin, a conductor's notes on music and social change, once hailed as the greatest horn player alive by the New York Times. Eager was principal soloist for the New York Philharmonic and the Los Angeles and National Symphony Orchestras, before re-emerging as a world-renowned symphony conductor and social activist. Please welcome Joe Eager.
In 1947, Albert Einstein wrote the following: "The economic anarchy of capitalist society is the real source of the evil. Private capital tends to be concentrated in few hands, the enormous power of which cannot be effectively checked. The members of legislative bodies are selected by political parties largely financed by private capitalists. The consequences is that the representatives of the people do not sufficiently protect the interest of the underprivileged sections of the population. Private capitalists inevitably control, directly or indirectly, the main source of information: press, radio, education. It is thus extremely difficult, and indeed in most cases quite impossible, for the individual citizen to come to objective conclusions and to make intelligent use of his political rights. The crippling of individuals I consider the worst evil of capitalism. Our whole educational system suffers from this evil. An exaggerated competitive attitude is inculcated into the student, who is trained to worship acquisitive success as preparation for his future career." Einstein, 1949. Now, before I get to my book, my main book, a bit about my current writing. I'm doing a new book, and this is continuation of Einstein. As a musician, Einstein was especially sensitive to prescience and precognition. His notes of 49 could easily have been written today. His sentiments echo today, as when many countries are going through social and economic turbulence with related religious and racial strife. What Einstein could not foresee was how dire the situation had become. The emergence of ferocious fascism in the world's most powerful imperialist nation, the corporate control of elections, the methodical militarism as nation after nation comes under its control, the often violent internal attacks on rights such as the right to assemble, the secret surveillance bolstered by legislation like the Patriot Act, the police and paid thuggery against those trying to organize, the wholesale imprisonment of huge numbers of poor people, mostly black and Latinos, without hope of jury trial, redress, judicial review, or legal representation. The growing permanent army of unemployed, the ever-diminishing middle class, the virtual corporate takeover of the educational system as a money-making scheme, the chemicalization of the earth's water, seas, air, and food, television's insidious endemic hypocrisy as we salute the flag and genuflect before America as the world's example of democracy and freedom. Einstein sensed the incipient role of Israel in its very early days as a state when he was offered the presidency and refused the offer. What he couldn't know some 60 years later was how the now powerful Israeli lobby, represented by the American Israel Political Action Committee and similar Jewish organizations, I'm Jewish, together with the bought and paid for, wholly owned House and Senate members with financial help from the incredibly wealthy Koch brothers and other corporate fat casts, used their huge amassed wealth to control domestic and foreign policy. Einstein might have been surprised at the multifaceted attacks on the entire female half of the world's population, especially the poor and unschooled, on issues such as birth control education, abortion rights, forced transvaginal ultrasound, and forced childbirth. But he would have been heartened by the birth of a new consciousness and struggle for gender, economic, and social equality, especially women's right to control their bodies. Most of all, he would welcome the Occupy movements in many nations, and as a proclaimed socialist, would have strongly supported these movements. As a fair-minded person, he would also have welcomed a tiny few well-meaning captains of industry like George Soros, who are locked into a capitalist paradigm. If we don't do it, our competitors will, in a system built on the satisfaction of greed and profits. Inevitably, human values and the basic character of human civilization are besmirched. Capitalists and their client governments become willing participants in their own and our demise. America and Israel openly incite war against Iran or Syria and against their internal populations. Decisions are made for us by a self-perpetuating system. For example, the rush toward cheaper labor in underdeveloped nations becomes a necessity in order to meet the latest bottom line. American jobs are lost to outsourcing. Corporate leaders collect skyrocketing profits, shrug their shoulders, and revel in their vacation homes, private planes, and yachts. Developing nations, happy to garner a few jobs, are despoiled of their natural and human resources. Some eagerly advertise their willingness to be used in this manner just for the few pennies needed for their children's survival. A climate of national nervousness and uncertainty pervades even the rich societies. The putrid toxicity of this global system affects a starving child in Bangladesh as it does the character of the child of a corporate capitalist. All will eventually be the victims of global warming, which will affect the media, pundit, and politicians, and self-important economists. NASA weather experts and 99% of global scientists tell us that we're running out of time. But what can we do? I'm going to skip to my book, and I'm going to say it because I see I have less than 2 minutes to talk. All my life, I have studied to come to the conclusions that there are just patches that can be put down, patches that are important to alleviate the suffering of peoples in this country and other countries as well throughout the world. And I've learned that the young people, and especially in the Occupy movements, have more wisdom and more intelligence than the adult populations have. And I think they're right in that the only real solution is to abolish the capitalist system. They can't help themselves. I've known some very wonderful people in the capitalist world, but they can't do anything about the whole system, which is a system which kills people, including their own children eventually. And so I'm all for young people and for the Occupy movements and for young in heart as apparently the readers in this audience are. So in my 90s, I salute all of you who are struggling for a better world and for overturning a system which does such harm, as Einstein said, crippling the individual. And we must not be crippled anymore. And we must devote our lives, as I'm doing, as the Veterans for Peace, which I joined recently, are doing, and for the musicians and the scientists and the artists who are the people who can best make changes. Because to be a good musician, you have to explore what's wrong and what's right. And the only way to become a good musician, as a famous musician and our audience knows so well, you have to discover new ways of functioning that will make the music sound better. So thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you, Joseph Heuer.
Yes.
91 years young.
Yes.
I can see we're going to need more readings. And now we have a poet, Barry L. Reese of Pittsburgh, 77, former neighbor of mine, who served in both the U.S. Army and the National Guard, is a Korean War-era veteran and poet. The author or co-author of more than 40 textbooks on interpersonal relationships, leadership, and communications. Reese is Professor Emeritus at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State College, and will read from his second work of collected poems, Lingering Memories, Second Act, New and Selected Poems. Barry Reese.
John does a nice job of keeping these things organized and keeping our chapter, which happens to be, by the way, the Eisenhower Chapter of Veterans for Peace. Poetry has played a major role in the peace movement for many, many years. And some of you in the room might be familiar with a book called Poets for Peace, which was published actually in 2002. And we had over 40 poets in this area, Chapel Hill, Raleigh, Durham, and so forth. So I'm going to ask John, were you looking for this?
Yeah.
I saw you looking. I saw it up here on the patio. So I'm pleased this evening to continue the tradition of reading peace poems on Memorial Day, and I'm happy to be here. When I write a poem, there's 2 or 3 things I often try to do. I try to pick a title that'll kind of grab your attention. Secondly, I like to place an epigram underneath the title, if possible, a powerful epigram. And the third thing I like to do, when possible, is bring in a cameo from a noted writer, composer, something like that. And I'm pleased to report that tonight I'll be bringing Neil Young will be joining me this evening. Thrilled that's the opportunity. So the first poem, the title, Living with War Every Day. The epigram, oh God, where is this thing called peace, that humankind may find release? Carl Armin Behe. Fiery rhetoric fuels the flames of war. Better there than here. The right war, the right time, the right place. Bring them on.
Thousands of bodies in the ground, brought home in boxes to a trumpet sound.
Bombs fall on Sumerah, Quangnam, Umor, Haifa. Civilian casualties mount. Leaders invoke God when speaking of a war that involves maiming and killing of innocent people.
Thousands of children scarred for life, millions of tears for a soldier's wife.
The procession of flag-draped coffins is endless. A grieving mother stands near an open grave. The echo of taps marks the end of another soldier's life. This next, thanks Neil, by the way, I appreciate the help that you gave me. Neil Young has a wonderful CD called Living with War, and some of you probably have heard that. I grew up on an Iowa farm, and I was fortunate that both my grandmothers lived nearby on small farms. We were all sharecroppers, and they were worriers. They worried a lot about grandchildren and the safety of their children and the weather and so forth. So this poem deals with a grandmother and her dog waiting for a grandson to come home from war. And the title is Tommy. I don't have an epigram for this one, but this is about Tommy. The rhythmic cadence of knitting needles slows, then stops. Maud thinks about Tommy. Is he safe? Toby sleeps near Maud's feet. Dark dreams trigger occasional whimpers. Why hasn't Tommy come home? Letters from Iraq are piled neatly on the kitchen table, bound by a yellow ribbon. Was his last letter his last letter? The Bible on the lamp table lies open to Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called God's sons. Why are warriors our heroes? Toby rises quickly and runs to the door. Head cocked, he listens attentively. What does he hear? Silence is broken by a loud knock. Maud steps to the window and pulls back the curtain. Two soldiers stand erectly. The last poem that I'll read I grew out of some experience I had at the Vietnam Memorial, and I've also spent some time at the Iraq Memorial, which is moving around the country. And if you've been there, you know that the wall is divided by years, and you can quickly see how many victims of the war occurred during different years, 1960 or 1971, whatever. So this is kind of a mechanical poem, but it has an awfully good vignette, opening epigram, I think. The title of it is The Wall. We were wrong, terribly wrong. Robert McNamara. Visitors stand in silence, sharing grief and pain. War casualties etched in a polished granite. 1959, 2. 1960, 5. 1961, 16. Each year the numbers grow, row after row. Young lives cut short. 1966, 6,144. 1967, 11,614. 1968, 16,589. A girl stops, gently touches the name of the father she never met. Tears flow freely. Leaders in Washington are not moved by sentimentality. Vietnam casualties are acceptable losses. It was a long war, a tragic war, an unwinnable war. Thank you.
Some things seem to require poetry and song to be better understood. Our next presenter is the principal organizer of this event tonight at the Regulator. Her name is Vicki Ryder. Her husband Doug Ryder, who is also here, is a Vietnam veteran himself. Vicki is one of the principal songwriters of the Raging Grannies. If you're not familiar with the Raging Grannies, they were begun out in Vancouver, Washington by grandmothers who organized to protest the shipment of nuclear materials through their port city. And they made such a ruckus and got so much good press that different gaggles of grannies started springing up all the way across Canada, jumped upon England, Greece, back here in the US of A. For a long time, the Chapel Hill Grannies were the only group of grannies in the South. Now we have the Triangle Grannies, that we have members from Raleigh and Durham as well as Chapel Hill, but also groups springing up in Tennessee and in other parts of North Carolina. South Florida, right? So in addition to prose and poetry, we have now a song by Vicki Ryder, The Dying Soldier, performed by Vicki.
Unlike the granny songs that I write, mostly for fun, this is not one of my original compositions. This song was written by Albert Wood in 1952 as a young soldier lay dying on a hill in Korea. And as he lies there in the mud, his thoughts go back to the nursery rhymes that his mother sang to him when he was a little boy. Now I lay me down to die. I ask you, Mama, please don't cry. My toy tin soldiers just passed through, and your son went marching too. With Jack and Jill we climbed the hill. I guess we took an awful spill, and all of us came tumbling down, and here I lie upon the ground. Tom, Tom, the piper's son, he picked up Jack and away did run. But he looked at me and he shook his head, and he lay me on the side instead. Humpty Dumpty and King Cole sat around and counted their gold. They made a profit on the toys that are killing our girls and boys. Miss Bo Peep, she's seeking her sheep from night until the dawn. Mama, Mama, don't you cry. Boy Blue has come to blow his horn.
Thank you, Vicki Ryder. Vicki's been a real inspiration to us in so many different ways, artistically, organizationally, with her action. But she's not the only one who inspires us. And now it's my privilege to make a presentation in appreciation for his determination to deliver his message of peace to our representatives in Washington, D.C. Sam Winstead led a bicycle ride for peace 350 miles from Raleigh, North Carolina to the White House, April 29th to May 5th, 2012. During his 7-day ride, the 86-year-old World War II veteran, Marine combat veteran, braved the elements, fatigue, and the daunting hills of North Virginia in a demonstration of unstinting courage and devotion which inspire us to raise our own voices in the call to put an end to war. Presented this day, May 28, 2012, by the members of the Eisenhower Chapter of Veterans for Peace, a Beacon for Peace awarded to Samuel Winstead.
Well, I was just thinking today, I've been a Rotarian for 35 years, and I read something in my Rotarian magazine today that reminded me how important it is for us to come together. We come from different forms, shapes, but John and many others came to support me in what I intended to do, and it just made a world of difference.